6 months ago, I gave up a $300,000 career to care for my dying mother. My sister called it career suicide. At my son's wedding, she humiliated me in front of our CEO. What she didn't know. He'd been begging me to return. That night, everything changed for her, and for me. The view from my corner office stretched across the Manhattan skyline, a panoramic reminder of everything I had earned. 20 years, 60-hour weeks. Missed birthdays, skipped holidays, and dinners eaten under the cold hum of fluorescent lights. I'd fought tooth and nail for this office, the title of Senior Marketing Director, and the respect that came with managing a $50 million annual budget. People didn't just know my name in the industry, they returned my calls fast. But that morning, none of it mattered. The call came at 8:06 a.m. My hands shook as I pressed the phone to my ear. Stage 4, the oncologist said. We're looking at months, not years, my mother, the woman who raised me. The one who never missed a parent-teacher conference or a piano recital, even when I told her I didn't care if she came. I sat in silence, listening to words that cracked my heart wide open. Terminal, palliative, irreversible. My assistant buzzed me, something about a crisis with the Samsung campaign. Any other day, I'd be in war room mode already, flipping charts and rallying the team. Instead, I looked at the resignation letter sitting in my drafts. I'd written it a dozen times over the last few weeks, tweaking phrases, rebalancing justifications, but always saved it, never sent it. Until now. By noon, I had cleared out my desk. No fanfare. No goodbye party. Just a few polite hugs and an empty office behind me. I submitted the letter electronically, CCing HR and my team. The out-of-office auto-reply was simple. Thank you for your partnership. I've chosen to take a leave to care for a family member. Please direct all inquiries to... And that was it. No one tells you how disorienting it is to leave a job that has defined your identity. At first you float untethered, weightless. Then the questions come. Are you okay? Are you taking a break? What happened? But no one really wants the truth. Sandra certainly didn't. She showed up at Mom's house 3 days later, wearing a new Hermes bag and an expression too smug to ignore. So, she said, dragging out the word like it was laced with condescension. You're just done? All that effort for nothing. I was adjusting Mom's foredrip at the time, something I'd learned from a home nurse and a YouTube rabbit hole. It's called taking care of family, I said. She waved a hand like she was swatting away my words. It's called giving up. But I guess not everyone's built for long-term success. I let it pass. Not because it didn't sting, but because the person lying in that bed mattered more than Sandra's opinion ever could. Sandra visited maybe once a week, usually long enough to snap a selfie with Mom and caption it #FamilyFirst for her Instagram. Meanwhile, I was canceling meetings with executives, handling insurance paperwork, and waking up every 2 hours to help Mom use the bathroom. Every day felt like a battle. Not just against the disease, but against the creeping sense of invisibility. LinkedIn went quiet. I stopped receiving invites to conferences. One former colleague messaged me, just checking it, heard you had a breakdown. Another said, maybe it's good you're stepping back. Burnout's real. Burnout? No, this was a conscious choice. A fierce, painful, necessary one. But try explaining that to people who equate worth with work. My mother didn't always recognize me. Some mornings, she called me by my sister's name. But then there were moments, little pockets of clarity. She'd hold my hand, smile faintly, and whisper, "You're here." That's all I need, and that made everything worth it. I gave up boardrooms for bedside vigils, strategy decks for ensure shakes. KP is for quiet conversations about memory and music and the things that matter when time is short. I had no regrets. None. But there is something they don't tell you about sacrificing for family. People start writing your story without your permission. They call it a breakdown. They label you unemployed. They assume you fell, when in truth you rose. Sandra told anyone who listened that I quit because I couldn't handle the pressure. She said it like it was a punchline. But I wasn't broken, I was reborn, clearer, stronger, more dangerous than ever. Because I didn't just walk away from my career. I chose my mother. And that's the kind of decision only someone with real power can make. The thing about Sandra is she never needed an audience to be cruel, but she loved having one. From the moment I resigned, she saw my decision as a green light. A chance to finally rewrite our story with her as the successful sister and me as the cautionary tale. And she wasted no time doing it. At Easter dinner, she leaned in close to our cousins and said with a too loud laugh, "Melanie's taking a break from reality. Burned out, poor thing." Then she patted my shoulder like I was a child who'd fallen off a bike. Not everyone's built for the long haul. At Mother's bedside, she'd roll in during her lunch breaks in head-to-toe designer, perfume cloud announcing her presence. She'd stay long enough to take a photo posed flattering, carefully lit and posted on Instagram with captions like, "Family first, #blessed, #bossbabe. Double quotes. Then she'd vanish. I was the one rotating mom every few hours, brushing her hair, playing her favorite songs when she was too weak to talk. Sandra didn't see those moments, and she didn't care to. Her version of family care came with filters and likes. She started peppering her social media with jabs. Subtle enough to be deniable, sharp enough to cut. Some people choose success. Others choose excuses. Not everyone's built to thrive in corporate life. Don't apologize for ambition. The world needs leaders, not martyrs. Even our extended family took the bait. Uncle Robert, who used to call me for business advice, now directed his questions to Sandra. Aunt Patricia slid job postings across the table at family dinners. "Just in case you want to get back out there." Sandra smirked every time. But the real betrayal came in whispers I didn't hear at first. According to Jake, she'd started talking about me at her new job, saying I'd had a breakdown, couldn't handle the pressure. Walked away from a $300,000 role because I snapped. I wanted to believe he was exaggerating. My own sister wouldn't do that, would she? But then I saw the LinkedIn post. Her smiling beside a banner that read Leadership Summit 2025. The caption, "Promoted again." When you focus on results, not excuses, the sky's the limit. Beneath that, a comment from a coworker. "Your sister could learn a thing or two from you." She replied with a winking emoji. And just like that, the game was no longer passive-aggressive. It was war. But I didn't strike back. Not yet. Because my mother was still alive. Because I refused to stoop to Sandra's level. Because some battles aren't worth fighting not until you can win them with style. Sandra thought she was winning. That I was fading quietly into obscurity. That I was too ashamed, too weak, too irrelevant to fight back. She was wrong. The thing about Sandra is she never needed an audience to be cruel, but she loved having one. From the moment I left my job, she treated my choice like a punchline. A woman with a 20-year career walking away to care for her mother. In her eyes, it was weakness dressed up as virtue. And she wasted no opportunity to remind me or everyone else. "Melanie's on a break from reality," she said at Easter dinner, her voice carrying over the clatter of silverware. "Burned out, poor thing." Then came the condescending pat on my shoulder. "Not everyone's built for the long haul." The room laughed politely. I just smiled and passed the potatoes. At Mom's house, it was worse. Sandra would swoop in during her lunch breaks, dressed head to toe in high-end labels, snapping a carefully curated selfie beside Mom's hospital bed. "Cherish your loved ones," she'd write on Instagram. #family first #corporate queen. Double quotes. Then she'd disappear, leaving me to change bedpans and coordinate hospice visits. When I told her that Mom needed round-the-clock care now, her response was a smirk. "You wanted this, Melanie. You chose this." As if it was a lifestyle trend I'd subscribed to. But the cruelty didn't stop at home. It followed me online, quietly but relentlessly. Her social media became a masterclass in veiled jabs. Some people build empires. Others build excuses, never apologize for ambition. The world needs leaders, not martyrs. Corporate life isn't for everyone. Some folks peak early. She didn't mention me by name. She didn't have to. Even our relatives started shifting. Uncle Robert, who used to call me for marketing advice, now asked Sandra about performance reviews. Aunt Patricia slid job listings toward me at Sunday dinners. "Just in case," she'd whisper, "so you don't get stuck." I wanted to scream. "I'm not stuck. I'm choosing this." But I stayed silent. Not because I agreed, but because I was exhausted. Because I had a terminally ill mother to care for. Because fighting with Sandra had always been a losing game one, where winning still felt like defeat. But the worst of it wasn't public. It was what she said when she thought no one else would know. Jake came home one night after work, his face tight, his jaw clenched. "Sandra's been talking about you at the office," he said quietly. "Says you had a breakdown, that you lost it. That you abandoned your career because you couldn't cut it anymore." My heart dropped. Jake worked at TechVision, the same company where Sandra had just been promoted to senior HR director. I knew she was petty, but I never expected her to sabotage me professionally. "She doesn't know we work in the same building," Jake added. "Different departments. But people talk. Mom, it's bad. She's trying to rewrite your story." My hands trembled as I refilled Mom's pill tray. "Let her talk," I said. The truth doesn't need defending, but deep down, I was shaken, because I knew how fast narratives spread. How easily reputations crumbled when the right lie came from the wrong mouth. Sandra wasn't just spinning stories, she was actively erasing everything I had built. Then came the final blow, a LinkedIn post, Sandra grinning beside a conference banner. "Promoted again." When you stay focused on results instead of distractions, the sky's the limit. Hashtag Leadership Summit 2025 hashtag no excuses. Beneath it, a comment from one of her coworkers. "Your sister could learn a thing or two from you." Sandra replied with a winking emoji. And that was it. No more benefit of the doubt, no more silent grace. No more forgiving under the guise of patience. I wasn't going to retaliate, not yet, but I was done playing the fool. Let her bask in her moment, let her gloat. Because what Sandra didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that the CEO she kept name-dropping at cocktail hours, the one she claimed personally mentored her, had been reaching out to me for months, asking when I'd be ready to come back. She thought I was broken. She thought I was done. But my silence. It wasn't surrender, it was strategy. There's a silence no one prepares you for, the kind that follows success when it's no longer tied to your job title. At first, it felt like freedom. No calendar alerts, number 7 a.m., conference calls, no performance reviews. But soon that freedom started to feel like exile. My phone, once buzzing with back-to-back calls, now stayed silent for hours. The texts from my team dwindled, then stopped. People I used to mentor ghosted me without explanation. One even unfriended me on LinkedIn. Not blocked, just removed, like I was a phase she'd outgrown. The industry I had once dominated moved on without so much as a glance back. Panels I used to moderate were now led by people I'd trained. Marketing conferences I once keynoted filled their speaker lists with fresh faces. I became a ghost in the community I helped build. LinkedIn was brutal. My profile used to sparkle endorsements, recruiter pings, high-level connections. Now? Crickets. The few messages I did get dripped with condescension. "Saw your sister's post. Hope everything's okay." Or worse, "Let me know if you need help finding something new." I wasn't looking for help. I was looking for space to grieve in peace. And yet, even in this silence, Sandra's voice rang loud. She kept posting promotion announcements, humble brags, digs disguised as wisdom. Some people crack under pressure. Others rise. That one got over 300 likes. I wish I could say her words didn't get to me, but they did, especially at night. When Mom was asleep and the house was dark, my thoughts would spiral. Had I made a mistake? Had I given up too much? Would I ever be able to re-enter the world I left? I started imagining worst-case scenarios, my skills becoming obsolete, my reputation fading. My value disappearing with every day spent off the radar. Friends stopped calling too. Not out of cruelty, out of discomfort. They didn't know how to talk to someone whose world had shrunk to a hospice bedroom. Invitations slowed, then stopped. Lunches became, when things calmed down. They never did. It wasn't just professional isolation. It was personal too. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. Worse were the passive-aggressive comments from acquaintances. "Must be nice not to work. You're lucky you have savings. I'd love to take a break. But I have bills to pay." As if I were sipping margaritas while my mother was dying. Some days I couldn't recognize myself. I'd go hours without speaking to another adult. I'd watch old commercials I directed just to remind myself I'd once mattered. I'd rehearse how I used to introduce myself at networking events. "Hi, I'm Melanie Irwin. Senior director of what? Not anymore. But then there were moments. Quiet, beautiful ones. Like when Mom would wake from a nap, look at me clearly and say, "Thank you for staying." Or when she'd call me her little lion, the nickname she used. When I was a stubborn 10-year-old who refused to give up, those moments grounded me. They reminded me that I hadn't fallen, I had simply stepped off the hamster wheel everyone else was still sprinting on. I hadn't failed. I'd paused. And while the world spun on without me, I was doing something sacred, something brave, something Sandra would never understand. Because true strength isn't in being seen. It's in choosing to be invisible when someone you love needs you most. The weeks before Jake's wedding were supposed to be filled with joy cake tastings, dress fittings, and last-minute details. For me, though, they carried a heaviness. Every family gathering became less about celebration and more about enduring Sandra's performance. She treated each event like a runway, showing off her promotions, her designer wardrobe, her curated success. And me, I was her prop, the foil to make her shine brighter. At the bridal shower, Sandra made a toast that wasn't really a toast. "To Emily and Jake," she announced, glass raised high, "may you always balance love and ambition." Some people lose themselves when they can't handle both. She looked right at me when she said it. The room laughed awkwardly, but I kept my smile steady. Mom, frail in her wheelchair, caught my eye. Her expression said everything. She knew Sandra was digging her claws deeper. Even in her declining state, Mom still saw through the noise. One afternoon, after Sandra breezed in and out with another staged photo op for Instagram, Mom squeezed my hand. "Don't let her win," she whispered, her voice weak but sharp. Not this time, Jake noticed too. He'd started at TechVision a few months earlier, throwing himself into his new role. One evening, while helping me adjust Mom's pillows, he spoke with unusual hesitation. "Mom, Sandra's been talking about you at work." I stiffened. "At work?" "Yeah, she doesn't know we're in the same building, different departments. But she's been telling people you had a breakdown, that you couldn't handle the pressure anymore." His tone carried both anger and shame, as if saying the words out loud felt like betraying me. I busied myself with Mom's medication tray, trying to keep my face neutral. "Let her talk." Jake wasn't convinced. "It's not right. You gave up everything for Grandma. That's not weakness. That's strength." His voice firm, protective, took me back to when he was 5 years old, defending me from playground bullies twice his size. Only now the bully was his own aunt. He softened then, changing the subject. "By the way, my new boss David Chun, he's coming to the wedding." He seemed really interested when I mentioned your background. "Said he'd heard of you." I smiled at Jake's attempt to lift my spirits, not realizing then how much those words would matter. As the big day drew closer, Sandra only grew bolder. She sent group texts about the guest list, carefully name-dropping every executive who'd our SVPD. "This wedding will be such a great networking event," she gushed. For her, it wasn't about Jake or Emily, it was about her audience. Meanwhile, I focused on Mom. The morning before the ceremony, she clasped a pearl necklace into my hand. "Wear these tomorrow," she whispered. "I wore them on my wedding day." "Promise me you won't let Sandra take your light." I promised. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake replaying every jab Sandra had delivered, every pitying look I'd endured since resigning. I knew with bone-deep certainty that Sandra would try to humiliate me in front of that crowd. What she didn't know was that the spotlight she craved so badly was about to betray her. The wedding wasn't just going to be Jake and Emily's big day. It was going to be the day Sandra's lies unraveled. And the day I reclaimed my story. The cocktail hour was supposed to be about champagne and polite small talk, but with Sandra in the room, it became theater. She was in her element, circulating from group to group, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor, her laughter carrying just a little too loudly. To her, this wasn't her nephew's wedding. It was a stage, and she was determined to perform. I kept to the edges, focusing on meeting Emily's relatives, but I could feel Sandra's eyes tracking me. She wanted me in her spotlight. And soon enough, she got her chance. "Everyone," she said brightly, waving a manicured hand as she pulled me toward a group of Jake's colleagues from TechVision. "This is my sister, Melanie. She used to be in marketing." The pause before "used to" was deliberate, dripping with implication. But she's taking a break now. One of the younger women, a TechVision badge clipped to her purse, smiled politely. Oh, what company were you with? Before I could answer, Sandra cut in. She's between opportunities, you know how it is. Sometimes people just can't handle the corporate pace anymore. Her laugh tinkled like glass shattering. Not everyone's built for the long haul. I kept my expression neutral, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a man near the bar. David Chun. His presence was quiet but commanding, and he was within earshot, pretending to study a wedding photo display. He glanced my way just once, and I recognized the knowing look.
He hadn't forgotten me. Sandra, oblivious, doubled down.
She leaned closer to the group, voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone just loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. It's actually kind of sad, she said, patting my arm. Melanie was doing so well once. Big budgets, big clients, but burnout is real. She cracked, walked away. Career suicide, really. The group shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between us. A few excused themselves, but Sandra wasn't finished. She was feeding off the discomfort, mistaking silence for admiration. Across the room, Jake had appeared with Emily at his side. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched at his sides, but Emily whispered something that made him stay back. She knew, like I did, that timing was everything. Sandra's voice grew louder, pulling more people into her orbit. When Melanie resigned, she said it was to take care of Mom, which is sweet, sure. But who throws away 20 years of success for that? It's noble, but impractical. She hasn't worked in 6 months. Honestly, I don't think she'll ever work again. A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. Someone even pulled out a phone, discreetly recording. Sandra, mistaking attention for validation, kept going. I mean, I've been promoted 3 times in 2 years. Just last month, our CEO personally picked me for a special project. David Chun himself told me I'm the future of TechVision leadership. She straightened her spine, basking in her own words. Meanwhile, Melanie's here as a guest at her own son's wedding. No job, no prospects, no relevance. Behind her, David Chun set down his glass and stepped closer. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, measuring. Sandra didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in her own performance. My phone buzzed then. A LinkedIn notification. A message from DC. Check your email. My heart skipped. The email was from last week, David's formal job offer. Senior VP of Marketing Strategy, $300K base, plus bonuses. The very opportunity Sandra insisted I'd never see again. I glanced up. David was watching me now, his phone still in hand. Sandra laughed again, tilting her glass for emphasis. She's basically unemployable, but hey, every family needs a cautionary tale, right? I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when you know a storm is about to break. Sandra thought she had the crowd, the narrative, the victory. But she had no idea the ground beneath her was about to give way. The crowd had grown around us, drawn by Sandra's increasingly loud voice. She thrived on it, mistaking curiosity for admiration, pity for respect. Every new arrival became another audience member for her one-woman show. This is my sister, she repeated to anyone within earshot. She used to work in marketing. Used to be quite successful, but you know how some people peak early. I noticed Jake at the edge of the circle, Emily holding his arm, his jaw tight with fury. He wanted to intervene, but Emily whispered something that made him stop. Timing was everything, and the show wasn't over yet. Sandra tilted her glass, her voice dripping with false sincerity. When Melanie resigned for personal reasons, I knew she'd never work again. Who's going to hire someone who abandoned a 20-year career? It's career suicide, she laughed, expecting the crowd to laugh with her. A few chuckled nervously, others shifted uncomfortably. Phones were out now, recording. Sandra thought it was for her. It wasn't. That's when David Chun stepped forward. Sandra's back was to him, so she didn't notice at first. She was too busy basking in the attention. I've been promoted 3 times in 2 years, she continued. Just last month, our CEO personally selected me for a special project. David Chun himself said I represent the future of TechVision leadership. Behind her, David's brow arched. He set down his drink, pulled his phone from his pocket, and typed quickly. A buzz rattled Sandra's clutch, but she ignored it, too focused on her performance. Then his voice cut through the chatter. Calm, steady, carrying the weight of someone used to commanding rooms. Is that so? Sandra froze. Slowly she turned. Her expression cycled through surprise, delight, then unease as she realized who was standing directly behind her. Mr. Chun. I didn't know you were here. Her smile widened artificially. This is perfect. I was just telling everyone about you. She grabbed my arm like a prop. This is my sister, Melanie. The unemployed one I mentioned. David didn't smile. His tone was clipped, his words deliberate. Yes, I heard your introduction. Very thorough. Sandra beamed, still missing the danger. I know you value honesty and transparency, so I thought it best to be upfront. David held her gaze for a long beat, then pulled out his phone again. I absolutely value honesty. In fact, I think this is the perfect time for some transparency. The crowd leaned in. Even the band softened their music, sensing a shift. David turned slightly, his voice carrying. Last month, I offered Melanie the position of Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy at TechVision. $300,000 base salary, plus bonuses. She turned it down. The air changed instantly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "She turned that down?" Sandra's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's not possible. She hasn't worked in 6 months. She quit. She left her position, David interrupted, his tone sharp, to care for her terminally ill mother. There is a significant difference between giving up and choosing what matters most. The murmurs grew louder. Phones angled higher. Sandra's painted smile began to crack. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, David said, his voice slicing through her excuses. Because you've spent the last 6 months publicly diminishing her. I've seen your posts. Some people choose excuses, others choose success. Career first. That wasn't ambition. Miss Morrison, that was cruelty. Sandra's eyes darted around, looking for an ally. No one met her gaze. David raised his glass slightly, though his eyes never left Sandra. 5 years ago, Melanie saved my company from collapse. She turned our marketing division into a profit engine and delivered returns that changed our trajectory entirely. She is a legend in this industry. And tonight, I find her own sister trying to humiliate her in front of colleagues, friends, and family. The silence was suffocating. Sandra's hands trembled around her champagne flute. Jake stepped closer, pride radiating from him. Emily squeezed his hand. David slipped his phone back into his jacket. Sandra Morrison, you've spoken enough. It's my turn now. The crowd straightened, bracing for what came next. This wasn't just a correction. This was a reckoning. The ballroom went still as David Chen took the microphone from the wedding coordinator. The squeal of feedback silenced even the band, and all eyes turned toward him. Sandra looked pale, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. I felt Jake slide closer to me, his grip steady and reassuring. David cleared his throat. Good evening, everyone. I'm David Chun, CEO of TechVision Corporation. It's an honor to be here celebrating Jake and Emily. A polite ripple of applause moved through the room. Sandra's lips twitched into a smile as though she still believed she could spin this. She couldn't. David's tone shifted, sharper now. Before we return to the celebration, I'd like to address something I just witnessed. Something about values, family, and what true success looks like. Sandra's eyes widened. The audience leaned in. 6 months ago, David continued, Melanie Irwin made a decision that few of us would have the courage to make. She walked away from one of the most successful marketing careers in this industry. Not because she failed, but because her mother needed her. His voice carried easily across the room. That choice does not make her weak. It makes her extraordinary. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Some guests whispered to each other, others nodded. The Fortune 500 executive I'd noticed earlier leaned forward, suddenly paying very close attention. David went on. For those who don't know, Melanie was responsible for campaigns that generated over 300% ROI for 5 consecutive years. She managed $50 million budgets and delivered results that most companies only dream of. She is the reason my former company sold for $200 million. Sandra's face crumpled as the weight of his words landed. The very people she had been trying to impress were now staring at her with open judgment. David paused, letting the silence stretch, then added, "Just last month, I offered Melanie a position at TechVision Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy, $300,000 base salary plus bonuses. She declined. Not because she couldn't handle the work, but because she chose family first." The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Even the waitstaff froze mid-step. Sandra swayed slightly, her hand gripping the back of a chair. David turned to her directly. "Miss Morrison, you've spent months calling your sister a failure. Tonight, you repeated those words in front of your colleagues, your family, and myself. That is not leadership. That is cruelty. And it is not the culture we build at TechVision." Sandra opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her humiliation was complete. Then David turned back to the room, raising his glass. His voice softened, filled with warmth. "So let's toast to Jake and Emily. May your marriage be as strong as your mother's character. And to Melanie Irwin, who reminds us that success is not about titles or salaries, but about the courage to choose what matters most." 200 glasses lifted as one. To Jake, Emily, and Melanie. As the champagne fizzed across my tongue, I glanced at Jake. His eyes shone with pride. Emily smiled through tears. Even Mom, watching on a live stream back home, would see this moment. Sandra slipped quietly out of the ballroom, her exit unnoticed except by those who had once orbited her spotlight. The stage she fought so hard to claim had turned on her. And in its place I stood taller than ever. This wasn't just a toast, it was the turning point. My story was no longer about sacrifice. It was about power reclaimed. The applause from David's toast was still echoing when something remarkable happened. Instead of dispersing back to small talk, the crowd surged toward me. People I hadn't seen in years, executives, former clients, industry insiders, pressed forward with business cards in hand. The same individuals who once looked past me now saw me clearly, maybe for the first time. "Melanie, we need someone to lead our global division. Name your price." "I'll triple whatever TechVision offered." Offers poured in, each louder and more desperate than the last. My phone buzzed with LinkedIn requests faster than I could swipe them away. Overnight, I had gone from invisible to the most sought-after person in the room. David raised a hand, quieting the chaos with ease. "I've already made Melanie an offer," he reminded them, his voice calm but firm. "But something tells me she has bigger plans than working for any of us." He was right. I had been drafting those plans in secret for weeks, never daring to believe they would see daylight. But in that moment, with every eye on me, I knew the time had come. I pulled out my phone and opened a draft email ID written the morning of the wedding. "Actually, I do," I said. My voice was steady, but inside, adrenaline surged. After 20 years of building other people's empires, I've decided to build my own. Irwin Strategic Consulting will launch next month, a boutique firm, working only with companies that value both performance and people. A murmur swept through the crowd. Then David smiled, genuine this time. "Of course," he said, almost to himself. "That's exactly what you do." He straightened, his voice carrying again. "In that case, TechVision would like to be your first client. $2 million initial contract, renewable annually. And we'd like you to start by restructuring our HR and culture messaging." Gasps rippled. Someone dropped a champagne glass. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sandra had just lost her job in TechVision SHR, and I was now being offered a contract to fix the department she once ran. More offers followed like a floodgate opening. Morrison Industries, $3 million. Jacobson Tech, $2.5 million. Wellington Partners, $4 million. In the span of minutes, I had verbal commitments totaling over $12 million. Jake hugged me tightly. "Mom, this is incredible." "This is your day," I smiled, whispering back. "No, sweetheart, this is yours." "And Emily's. I'm just borrowing the spotlight for a moment." Emily, tears in her eyes, shook her head. "Are you kidding? Our wedding just became legendary. People will talk about this for decades." By the time dessert was served, napkins had become makeshift contracts. Emily's father and attorney confirmed they were legally binding. Before the cake was even cut, Irwin Strategic Consulting had its first clients and $6 million in guaranteed revenue. But I didn't stop there. I set my terms clearly: remote work, flexible hours, complete autonomy over strategy, and a written clause that caregiving could never be counted against an employee's performance. David laughed when I read them aloud. Done, done, and done, he said, already drafting the paperwork on his phone. For years, I had played by rules written by others. That night, I wrote my own. Sandra's seat at the family table sat empty, her absence a silent monument to choices and consequences. Meanwhile, my table overflowed with contracts, champagne, and congratulations. When I finally stepped outside for air, the autumn night was cool against my skin. I thought of Mom at home, watching the live stream. She told me once that quiet strength is louder than any speech. She was right. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't fought. I had simply stood tall and the world had noticed. That night, Irwin's Strategic Consulting wasn't just launched. It was born in fire out of cruelty, humiliation, and betrayal, and it was stronger because of it. Monday morning came with a flurry of activity unlike anything I'd experienced in months. But instead of stepping into a glass tower in Manhattan, I sat at my mother's kitchen table. The oxygen machine hummed softly in the background as I opened my laptop. By 9 a.m., Irwin's Strategic Consulting was officially incorporated. By noon, deposits from my first 3 clients had cleared. $2 million from TechVision alone hit my account as I spoon-fed Mom her lunch. 6 months ago, I had walked away from everything. Now I was rebuilding on my own terms. The industry reacted instantly. My LinkedIn exploded, hundreds of messages from former colleagues, recruiters, even journalists. Forbes wanted to feature me in a piece about compassionate consulting. Business Insider requested an interview. What Sandra had tried to frame as a downfall had become the story of resilience and reinvention. But this wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about rewriting the rules. My first hires were people who had been pushed out of traditional corporate life. Single parents, caregivers, professionals sidelined for daring to put family first. We worked remotely, met during school hours, and still delivered results that rivaled entire in-house departments. The irony wasn't lost on me. What Sandra once mocked as weakness was now the backbone of my company's strength. Meanwhile, TechVision moved quickly to clean up the mess Sandra had left behind. Jennifer Liu, the young woman who'd defended me at the wedding, was promoted to interim HR director. She called me during her first week. "My first order of business is implementing your family-first policies," she said, determination in her voice. Unlimited caregiving leave, flexible hours, mental health support, the things Sandra fought against. Hearing that felt better than any contract signed. At home, life looked different too. Jake stopped by after work most evenings, brimming with pride at the buzz around my name in his office. Emily brought over home-cooked meals so I could focus on Mom. For the first time in years, my professional life and personal life weren't at war. They coexisted, finally in balance. Of course, Sandra wasn't silent. I heard she tried to claim wrongful termination, but with video evidence of her behavior and 200 witnesses, her case evaporated before it began. Rumors spread that she'd applied at smaller firms, starting over at entry level. Some called it karma. I called it consequence. Still, I didn't dwell on her. She had written herself out of my story. My focus was forward, on Mom, on Jake, and Emily, and on building a company that proved success and humanity could go hand in hand. At night, after contracts were signed and video calls ended, I would sit by Mom's bedside and tell her about the day's victories. Sometimes she was lucid enough to understand, and she'd smile with quiet pride. Other times, she simply squeezed my hand. Either way, she knew I had chosen her, and that choice had not destroyed me. It had rebuilt me. Sandra had tried to bury me under humiliation. Instead, she planted the seed of something far greater. Irwin's Strategic Consulting wasn't just a company. It was a statement that sacrifice could be strength, that compassion could be profitable, and that dignity always outlasts cruelty. From the ashes of Sandra's cruelty, I was rising higher than ever. A year after Jake's wedding, Irwin's Strategic Consulting occupied 3 full floors of a Manhattan building. Not that I ever worked there. My office was at home, sunlight streaming across the desk where I could look out at the garden I planted for Mom. She never got to see it bloom, but every flower felt like a reminder of her quiet strength. By then, we had 42 employees, all remote. All parents or caregivers. All brilliant professionals who'd once been told they didn't fit the mold of traditional corporate life. Together, we were proving that flexibility didn't weaken performance, it enhanced it. Our waiting list of clients stretched 2 years out. The company was valued at $30 million. Harvard Business School even turned our founding into a case study on values-driven leadership. But the real success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the messages I received daily. Because of you, I can care for my dad without fear of losing my job. Your policies let me attend my daughter's first recital. I finally feel like I can be both a professional and a parent. Those words mattered more than any contract. Sandra's name came up again, eventually. My Q mentioned it during a Monday meeting. Morrison Industries wants to hire us, he said carefully. Their new VP of Operations is Sandra Morrison. For a moment, I sat back, processing. Sandra had clawed her way back into the corporate world, not through arrogance but through real work. I'd heard whispers of her redemption. She'd started a blog about second chances, writing candidly about her mistakes without naming me. She no longer bragged. She no longer posted humble brags about promotions. She seemed changed. Take the meeting, I decided. But I won't lead the account. The meeting happened without me, but I watched the recording later. Sandra was professional, competent, composed. When asked about her experience with corporate culture transformation, she paused before saying, I learned the hard way that toxic leadership doesn't just destroy careers, it destroys families. And I refused to let that happen again. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. And maybe, in its own way, it was enough. Months later, at Jake and Emily's dinner party where they announced they were expecting their first child, Sandra wasn't there. Instead, she sent a gift and a card. The note read, Congratulations. I'm respecting the boundaries I should have honored from the start. Love always. Jake noticed me staring at it. Do you miss her? He asked gently. I thought about it for a moment. I miss who she could have been, I admitted. But I don't miss who she was. That night, I drafted an email I never sent. Sandra, your attempt to humiliate me gave me the push I needed to stop playing small. You thought you were exposing my weakness. Instead, you revealed my strength. Every cruel word became fuel. Every insult became inspiration. Now I have everything: career, freedom, family. You gave me that gift without realizing it. Thank you. I deleted it, but the truth lingered. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to burn, lighting the way forward. The next morning, I placed fresh flowers on Mom's grave. You were right, I whispered. Quiet strength really is the loudest of all. And with that, the circle closed. I had chosen family, and in the end, I gained everything. Sandra tried to shame me, but her cruelty became my catalyst. I built something better, not in spite of my sacrifice, but because of it. Success isn't just the best revenge. It's the quiet strength to thrive on your terms. If you've ever been underestimated, remember, you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes success speaks loudest of all.